All right, we're going to do another quick voice check. All right, we're going to do another quick voice check. All right, that sounds good. So thank you for, oh, we still got this up here. Let's get rid of that. All right. So my name is Michael. Thank you for joining me. I am going through my school's or my online course. I've already taken this course and passed the course, done the final exam, and I'm doing some additional studying. I took it over many months, took a little vacation in between, and so I am redoing the course before I take the state exam itself. I am in the state of Michigan, so I am studying for the state of Michigan. You'll see it says Michigan and Federal Fair Housing. This is pretty much all federal stuff. You might see a sprinkling of Michigan, like you'll see protected classes in Michigan, and we'll talk about some additional protected classes in Michigan. But for the most part, this is federal. You'll see that it says, "Oh, congratulations, you've completed the course." But we're going back through it, and as we go in, this is section 7, so I've already practiced the first 6 sections. There's 19 sections total, and each section has so many units. This is unit 1. There's a total of 6 units in this section, and each unit has so many lessons. And this one has 6, and then there's a little unit exam. As we go through it, you will see there is materials to read. I'll read the materials. And then we do a knowledge check at the end of each or through each lesson, and at the very end we'll do a unit exam. Um, this is going to take about an hour, I'm guessing. And just a couple things for full transparency. I am not a licensed real estate licensee in my state. I am still a student. If you are considering becoming a real estate licensee in your state and are curious as to what type of materials and learning and coursework you'll have to complete. This will give you some indication. Each state is different. Michigan requires 40 hours. I've heard of some states that require as many as 90. I believe that might be California, and then some others are more or less. For the most part, I think Michigan is on the lower side. I don't know every state though. I am not a paid endorser of um, of any group. So let me just fix this really quick. Give me 1 second here. So I'm not advertising the name of my school. You're going to see the name throughout, and I can't really completely avoid that. Um, but I am not endorsing them. So you're going to see me carefully try to keep their name out of the screen. I don't think that they would mind the name on the screen, but again, I'm not a paid endorser, so why would I endorse any particular school? And to be honest with you, not to not to speak negatively of anyone, I after taking the course, I would not necessarily know because I've not taken any other courses as to whether or not this is the best online education or not. So I am not endorsing any particular um, education material. So that is something that you would have to do your own homework on. Like I said, I've already done 6 previous units. Um, units, is that the term? Sections. But I can go back and do the previous 6. So if you like this material as I go through the different sections here, 7 and on, and you would like me to go back and do the previous 6, I might be able to do that. Please make comments. Please follow my page and let me know what you think and how I do. I would love to have that feedback, honest feedback. This is not my profession though, so please don't be too harsh. All right, so let's move on. Let's get started. We're going to go into introduction and objectives. like I said, there's times where I can't really block this out because there's nothing to scroll here. Introduction and objectives. Where we live is integral to all aspects of our lives, socioeconomic, employment, education. Looks like, there we go. Opportunity, safety. There is very little of our lives that our living conditions don't impact in some way. Necessarily, Fair housing law necessarily changes over time to ensure the objective of equal housing opportunities, equal living opportunities for all. In this unit, we'll look at federal fair housing laws, amendments, and course studies. We'll also review Michigan's protected classes. Okay. Objectives for this unit is identify the names and years of major federal fair housing laws and case studies. All right, lesson 1, federal fair housing laws. Federal fair housing laws. In the 1960s, the U.S. Supreme Court granted all citizens the right to own property. Since then, additional legislation has been added to enforce, clarify, and refine this edict. A federal, a few federal laws were responsible for most of the gains made in reducing discrimination. Among these, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is unique in that, unlike other exemptions permitted under the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, the Civil Rights Act of 1966 permits no exceptions that would allow racial discrimination. Let's take a closer look now at the federal laws that had the most impact on fair housing. And you'll see over here to the right that I've completed 100% of this course and how long it took me. So it was minimum was 33 hours. It's technically a 40-hour course, and it took me just under 72 hours to complete it. All right. So what you'll see here is there's going to be resources, and I already have those resources open in tabs, and then there are knowledge checks to each section. So the way you're supposed to do it is read the resource, and then let me see if I'm just looking at my screen here. I don't think the display capture is showing my cursor. So let me just, yeah, there we go. Let me turn on capture cursor because that would help. All right, so the resource here is Federal Fair Housing Law Summary. So we can come over here and find that document here. I've already opened it. So let's go through the Federal Fair Housing Law Summary. And as you can see, this is quite a bit of information. Now, what I'm also doing on another screen, which you cannot see, is I have notes that I'm taking. All right, so flashcards, if you will, that I have been making for myself to do additional study. So if you see me take a pause for a moment from reading and do some copying and pasting, that's for my own personal gain. Federal Fair Housing Law Summary. Throughout history, members of certain groups have been given different levels of service or denied service by people in the real estate industry. A number of laws have attempted to prohibit discrimination and provide remedies to those who continue to experience it. Civil Rights Act of 1866. So this is really important. This is going to be something that could very well be on the test. So I want to make sure. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 recognized all persons born in the U.S. as citizens, regardless of race or color, and protected the rights of every U.S. citizen to buy, sell, convey, inherit, and possess property, as well as to enter into contracts. In short, it made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race or color without exception. However, because there was no federal agency in place to enforce the laws, it would take another 100 years before the country saw a real shift in practice. Executive Order Number 11063. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 11063, which essentially ended segregation in federally funded housing. I'm going to go ahead and copy this because this could be on the test. I'll put this on my flashcards, but this is just a. Uh-oh. Do a little formatting here. There we go. I have just a two. I can show it to you really quick here as I try to fix it. A two-column thing here that I use basically. There we go. To take notes. Oops. There we go. Perfect. That's my note taking. Okay. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Again, all of these probably are going to be, could be, I should say, referenced on the on your state exam. Obviously, knowing the different acts is important. Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on age, color, national origin, and religion in programs receiving federal finance assistance. This act set the stage for the Fair Housing Act. All right, so that's the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 began a monumental change in the U.S. on April 11, 1968. Fair housing reached a pivotal moment when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act, called the Fair Housing Act, prohibited discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing and housing-related transactions based on race, color, national origin, and religion. It also created the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, the FHEO. That's a good little fact right there, right? And FHEO, under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Okay, let's just go ahead and put that extra in there. I know I make a lot of notes, but more is better than less. Trust me. All right. This agency is charged with enforcing fair housing laws and holding all parties accountable for compliance with these laws and regulations. Individuals who have experienced housing discrimination can file a complaint with the agency at no cost to themselves. Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. The Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 amended the Fair Housing Act of 1968 to add sex to the list of protected classes. In the years leading up to this time, women endured sexual harassment and discrimination by landlords and sellers that made it difficult for them when obtaining housing. Okay, so as you'll see, a lot of this is just layered on top of each other, and knowing which one added which um, is important, because you might see that on there. They might say which act added sex or gender as a protected class, and they're going to want you to know that. Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974. During this time, women continued to lack credit. The lenders considered their salaries to be temporary or unstable. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 backed up the Housing and Community Development Act by requiring lenders to give businesses and consumers equal access to credit. The ECOA prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex or gender, marital status, or age, provided the applicant has the capacity to contract, meaning they're at least the age of consent. In addition, lenders must offer reason when rejecting applications and must respond to all applications within 30 days. All right. So as you can see, we're adding protected classes here. Layering it on, now we have race, color, religion, national origin, sex or gender, marital status, and age. All right. All right. Fair Housing Amendment Act. In 1988, the Fair Housing Amendment Act provided consumers with remedies if they believed they were victims of discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing of housing. This act also added familial status and disability, both physical and mental, to the existing protected classes. Owners must, when necessary, make reasonable accommodation to the rules, policies, and practices in order to provide a person with a disability access to dwellings. All right. Americans with Disability Act of 1990. The American with Disabilities Act of 1990, ADA, prohibits discrimination based on disability in programs, services, and activities provided or made available by public entities. It strengthens the 1988 amendments regarding disabilities. Title II of the Act applies to public housing, housing assistance, and housing referrals. HUD is responsible for enforcing it. All right, I am going to put that in there. That is important. There's a lot of important notations in this particular um, section. Some have more than others, so you just kind of. I've taken a lot of practice exams now, some that I've passed and some that I've not. So I kind of have an indication of the things that I need to brush up on. Housing for Older Persons Act of 1955. The Housing for Older Persons Act of 1955 states that communities and facilities that meet certain criteria providing housing to older persons are legally exempt from familial status discrimination. The housing must have one person who is age 55 or older residing in it at least in at least 80% of its occupied units. So this is really important. This does come up. So again, and there's a couple of different, and you'll see as we go through, there's a couple different things here that pertain to um, exemptions for seniors or older folks. Not that a 55-year-old is a senior. Please don't get mad at me. At least not in my opinion, because I'm getting there. All right, so let me read that again. The housing must have one person who is age 55 or older residing in, and at least 80% of its occupied units, and the housing provider must demonstrate that the housing is intended for persons 55 and older. Exemptions to the Fair Housing Act. Fair housing law was designed to protect citizens from discrimination. It was not designed to prohibit non-discriminatory behavior or even certain behaviors that discriminate, but to protect citizens seeking housing. Following are some exemptions to coverage under the Fair Housing Act. Owner-occupied buildings with no more than 4 units. This exemption is commonly known as the Mrs. Murphy exemption. Mrs. Murphy is the hypothetical elderly widow who's converted a portion of her home into rental apartments to supplement her limited income. Note that this exemption doesn't apply to advertising, so Mrs. Murphy can't run an ad indicating, for example, that a certain religious group isn't welcome to rent her apartment or room. Also, this exemption doesn't apply when a real estate agent represents the property owner because the law presumes agents are professionally trained and aware that housing discrimination is against the law. Single-family housing sold or rented without the use of a broker. This exemption applies only for a private individual owner who doesn't own more than 3 such single-family homes at one time. Housing operated by organizations and private clubs that limit occupancy to members. Housing designed for senior use. Here we are again. Senior housing must meet specific requirements to qualify for this exemption. HUD determines that the dwelling is specifically designed for and occupied by elderly persons under a federal, state, or local government program, or it's occupied solely by persons who are 62 or older, or if houses at least if or it houses, excuse me, at least one person who is 55 or older in at least 80% of the units and adheres to a policy that demonstrates intent to house persons over 55. Note, when state and federal laws conflict, as they sometimes do in fair housing human rights, the more restrictive law prevails. Okay. Now, just a quick note, owner-occupied buildings basically means if you're renting out a room in your house or your apartment and you're the homeowner or leasee, lessee, you can discriminate as to whom you want living with you, with the exception of race. So if you're a female and only want females, or a male maybe only wants males, or even a male that only wants females, or a gay man that only wants other gay men, you can do that by law. But you can never discriminate against anybody based on race. All right, let's go back here. So we're going to do our knowledge check now. So we're going to have a bunch of little knowledge checks, some more than others. Federal fair housing laws and protected classes. Build the story using the following items. Now, I will just make a note here as someone who's already gone through these resources in this class and done this study. Uh, as you go through it, you may feel like, well, this is really easy. It's a knowledge check. You just read the material. However, if you come back 24 or 48 hours later and don't read the material and do the knowledge check, you'll really have an idea of how much information you're absorbing. So it's a little biased toward doing well, if you will. I'll just say it that way. Can you keep the laws straight? Choose the appropriate protected class for each sentence. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was the first step in reducing discrimination based on race and color. The Fair Housing Act of 1866 prohibited discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or religion. The Housing and Community Development Act added, what do we think? We're going to do sex next because that seems to be the right to the list of protected classes. In 1988, the Fair Housing Amendments Act extended the protection to cover familial status and disability. The Housing of Older Persons Act in 1955 protected exceptions for housing designed just for seniors. Okay, now this is really easy. You say, oh, I can remember that. The Housing for Older Persons Act of 1955 provided exemptions for housing designed for what? Seniors. That's easy. But if the question on the test is, which act provided exceptions for housing designed just for seniors, you would need to know the Housing for Older Persons Act of 1995. Now, the test may say the Housing for Older Persons Act of 1995, the Housing for Older Persons Act of 1990, or 1985. It's always a multiple choice, and that's where it can really trick you up. So that's where studying is important. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, this will tell us if our answers are correct or not. So you understand the progression of events. Let's keep cruising. Great. Put them in order. If you struggle with keeping these straight, try boiling them down to one bullet point each and putting them in context of other events happening in the U.S. at that time. The Civil Rights Act in the 1860s was a result of the Civil War, race and color. The 1960s civil rights movement was largely responsible for the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, race, religion, and national origin. Feminism, was in full swing in the 1970s when sex was added via the Housing and Community Development Act. Changing family structures, single women in the workforce, and additional opportunities for people with disabilities led to further changes in 1988 requiring amendments to the original Fair Housing Act. Finally, outdated laws with staircases and small bathrooms proved to be a hindrance for wheelchairs, and the rights for people with disabilities were strengthened in 1990. After everything was implemented, exemptions were required to allow senior-specific housing. Okay, let's see. So we're still on federal fair housing. Okay, let's keep going. All right, go to 2, case history lesson in fair housing. There's lots and lots of content to this section. A handful of legal cases drove the most significant changes in fair housing. Each case had a different impact on fair housing practices in the U.S. We'll summarize four monumental U.S. Supreme Court cases over the next few slides. Plessy versus Ferguson. On June 7, 1892, 30-year-old Homer Plessy was thrown in jail for sitting in the white car of the East Louisiana Railroad. So in a white only car on a train. Plessy was considered black despite his light skin tone and therefore was required to sit in the colored car. He was labeled a Creole of color, a term that once referred to people in New Orleans who traced some of their ancestors back to the French, Spanish, and Caribbean settlers of Louisiana before the area became part of the U.S. When Louisiana passed the Separate Car Act, legally segregating common transporters in 1892, a black civil rights organization decided to challenge the law in the courts. Plessy deliberately sat in the white car section and identified himself as black. He was arrested and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Plessy's lawyer argued that the Separate Car Act violated the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court heard the case and held the Louisiana segregation statute constitutional. One justice, John Harlan, saw the negative consequences of the decision. Quote, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law," end quote, Harlan said. But he was the only justice who disagreed with the decision. Quote, "Separate but equal," end quote, became the new guideline. The Plessy decision stated that separate facilities for blacks and whites were constitutional as long as they were equal. The separate but equal doctrine was extended thereafter to cover many areas of public life, such as restaurants, theaters, restrooms, and public schools. The U.S. Supreme Court's 1896 decision in Plessy v. Ferguson was the first to establish, quote, "separate but equal" doctrine of legalized racial segregation. A series of court decisions and federal laws between 1948 and 1968 tried to address the inequities in housing that were the result of this case. However, those efforts only dealt with certain areas of the housing market, such as federally funded housing programs. Because of this, their impact was quite limited. It wasn't until Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was enacted that things began to change regarding specific discriminatory practices throughout the housing and real estate industry. All right, let's do our knowledge check. The first case is Plessy versus Ferguson from the 1890s. This case set the stage for what would commonly be known as the blank doctrine, separate but equal. All right, that's correct. Build the story with the following terms. We're on to Buchanan versus Warbley. All right, let's go to that one. Where did it go? Here we go. All right. In 1915, Buchanan, a white person, sold a house to Worley, a black person, in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville had an ordinance at that time that prohibited blacks from living on a block, where the majority of the residents were white. Because most of the houses were occupied by whites, Worley was not allowed to live on the block. Buchanan sued to complete the sale. Worley cited the city ordinance as the reason for not completing the sale. Buchanan alleged that the ordinance violated the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Kentucky Court of Appeals upheld the statute barring blacks from owning there. In a unanimous decision, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the Kentucky Court of Appeals, ruling that the ordinance was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court cited the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment in stating that they assured, quote, to the colored race the enjoyment of all the civil rights enjoyed by white persons, end quote. All right, let's do our knowledge check. Build the story. In Buchanan versus Worley, Worley had planned to buy Buchanan's house. When Worley learned that he wouldn't be allowed to live there because of a city ordinance banning blacks from moving to a block where the majority of residents were white, he backed out of the sale. The seller sued him for backing out, but Worley said the city ordinance was a valid reason to not complete the sale. Buchanan then fought the city ordinance, claiming it violated the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court agreed with Buchanan. The city ordinance was not constitutional. All right, let's talk about Brown versus the Board of Education will be next. Some of these are the way this works. Let's extend those. Like I said, we got a lot to go through in this course. All right, Brown v. Board of Education. The case that came to be known as Brown versus Board of Education was the name given to represent 5 separate classes that were heard by the U.S. Supreme Court cases that were heard by the U.S. Supreme Court concerning the issue of segregation in public schools. These cases were Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Briggs versus Elliott, Davis versus Board of Education of Prince Edward County, Boiling versus Sharp, and Gebhardt versus Ethel. At issue in each was the constitutionality of state-sponsored segregation in public schools. Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund handled these cases. Not finding satisfaction at the district court level, the plaintiffs appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1952, and the court consolidated all 5 cases under the name of Brown v. Board of Education. Marshall personally argued the case before the court. Many legal issues were raised, but the predominant one was that separate school systems for blacks and whites were inherently unequal and thus violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Marshall also presented data from social scientist Kenneth Clark and others that showed that segregated schools systems had a tendency to make black children feel inferior to white children, and thus such a system should not be legally permissible. Most of the justices of the Supreme Court wanted to reverse Plessy and declare segregation in public schools to be unconstitutional, but were unable to reach a decision by June 1953, the end of the court's term. The court reheard the case in December of 1953 after the death of Chief Justice Fred Vinson, who was replaced by Governor Earl Warren of California. Under Chief Justice Warren, all of the justices agreed to support a unanimous decision declaring segregation in public schools unconstitutional. On May 14, 1954, Warren delivered the opinion to the court, stating that, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal," end quote. Because it anticipated opposition to the ruling, especially in the South, the court did not dictate how desegregation would be carried out or when. It merely asked the attorneys general of all states that allowed segregation in their public schools to submit plans for how they would implement desegregation. On May 31, 1955, 1 year after the court's decision, the justices disseminated a plan that called for all deliberate speed in the desegregation process. Although it would be many years before all desegregation was fully implemented, Brown and Brown 2 as the court's Brown and Brown 2 as the court's rehearing of the case was called paved the way. All right, let's do our little knowledge check. The primary Brown versus Board of Education was a major turning point for civil rights law in the U.S. Do you know the main points about the case? The primary issue was whether public schools should be allowed to be segregated. Well, I would say that's true. The case took place in the 1890s. I would say that's false. The result overturned the Plessy v. Ferguson precedent. I would say that's true. All right, we did good. All right, Jones versus Alfred H. Mayer Company. Let's find that. Here we go. Jones versus Alfred H. Mayer Company. In 1968, Joseph E. Lee Jones tried to buy a home in the Paddock Woods community of St. Louis County, Missouri. Alfred H. Mayer, who represented the Alfred Realty Company, refused to sell the homes to Jones. Jones claimed that the sole reason he was denied the sale was because of his race, African American. This was not denied by Mayer, who claimed the right to decide who purchased the property in a private sale. The district court ruled in favor of Mayer, saying that the federal law that protected discrimination in housing applied only to state action and did not apply to individual owners' private refusals to sell. The Supreme Court disagreed with the district court's interpretation and stated that it applies to all sales and rentals, even private ones, and it would bring the law in line with the 14th Amendment, which addresses citizenship rights and equal protection under the laws. This decision had far-reaching effects because it stated definitively that racial discrimination is not allowed in any state, in any sale of property within the United States. The decision also gave the Congress authority under the 13th Amendment to regulate against racial discrimination. All right. Jones v. Alfred H. Mayer Co. addressed a specific mindset that you'll still see today. Which one of the following statements is legally incorrect based on the verdict of Jones v. Mayer? Note that they are all discriminatory, but only one relates to Jones v. Mayer. It's my property. I have the right to choose who I sell it to. And that means I can discriminate against whoever I want. That's probably the one, but let's read the other two. Since I'm the client, my real estate professional must obey my orders when I say I don't want them to show this house to a specific race of people. That, of course, is discriminatory, but not the crux of Jones v. Alfred. I can discriminate as much as I want as long as I do it subtly and without advertising my preferences. Again, discriminatory, but we're going to stick with the first one. And yes, we were correct. All right. Recognize each case. In the field, you just need to know what you can and can't do. To prepare for your exam, however, you should know some of the specifics about the cases. Match each case with its impact. See if you can do it without referring to any resources. If you get stuck, you can return to previous interactions. All right. Separate but equal is not really equal. Segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. All right, we're going to say that Brown v. Board of Education. Separate but equal is sufficient. Segregation is allowable. That's going to be, I believe, Plessy v. Ferguson. Rules that ban certain races from living in certain areas are unconstitutional. We're going to say that is Jones v. Mayer. Discrimination is not allowed. Oh, I might get this wrong. Even when you're selling your own property. Oops. Yes, I got those two mixed up. Okay. So is not equally legal. Segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. Okay. And then this one's going to be Plessy. Rules that ban certain races from living in certain areas are unconstitutional. That's Buchanan versus Worley. Discrimination is not allowed even when you're selling your own property. Jones versus Mayer. Yay, we got it. So we have to remember these two. Buchanan versus Worley is locational, and Jones versus Mayer, which my last name is one of these two, is you can't discriminate when you're selling your own property. All right. Let's see, we got through those. Okay. Now we're going into lesson 3. More history, redlining, blockbusting, and steering. Redlining, blockbusting, and steering may sound like racing terminology, but in fact, they relate to prohibited conduct and are fair housing violations. So you'll want to steer clear. Let's check out your resource. Vroom vroom. All right, redlining, blockbusting, and steering. There's a reason these terms go together, and it goes back to the 1930s. So cue up the record player, slap on some Billie Holiday, and let's dive in. In 1934, this is pertaining to redlining, when the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, was created, it adopted the practice of redlining and utilizing a large map crossed off cities and neighborhoods it considered risky. The FHA wouldn't insure loans for properties in redlined areas. The heavy-handed sorting was based primarily on demographics, not on credit worthiness. Predominantly, white neighborhoods were considered least risky, and neighborhoods containing a large percentage of African Americans were deemed the highest risk. Mortgages have a primary and a secondary market. Lenders make loans in the primary market but depend on the secondary market to buy these loans in order to provide primary market lenders with more cash to fund more loans. If the FHA wouldn't insure these loans, lenders couldn't sell them on the secondary market and couldn't offer mortgages on properties in redlined areas without putting their own business at risk. This meant that property in redlined areas wouldn't sell easily, lowering property values in those neighborhoods. When redlining was common practice, property owners in predominantly white neighborhoods would, if enough minorities moved into the area, find their property values plummeting as soon as their neighborhood got a red line on the map. Thus, a fundamentally racist practice caused vicious cycles of owners moving out of areas that minorities were moving into, aka blockbusting, and avoiding already redlined areas. So what is blockbusting? Because of potential redlining, blockbusting became a profitable play for real estate agents. Agents approached owners as soon as a demographic shift started to occur and convinced them that if they didn't sell now, they would never be able to. Sometimes they outright lied and convinced people that property values were declining due to minorities moving in, even when it wasn't true. As whites fled from inner cities to suburbs and African Americans were prohibited from obtaining mortgages in those suburbs, cities became increasingly segregated because it was the only way to avoid losing property value in predominantly white areas. The FHA officially supported keeping incompatible racial groups out of the newly developed white suburbs. Steering. Knowing the demographic makeup of all the neighborhoods in the area, real estate agents engaged in steering to encourage whites to live in the white areas and all the minorities to minority prevalent areas. In 1968, the 1968 the Fair Housing Act, which banned blockbusting, steering, and redlining, provided the first step in reversing these negative practices. The mentality, however, in, was firmly ingrained in the minds of homeowners, lenders, and real estate professionals. All three violations continue to happen today and are actively being addressed by human rights advocates. If you're interested in these topics, check out the 1 hour episode, House Rules of the American Life, etc. We're not going to be watching a 1 hour episode today. All right, let's do our knowledge check. Redlining, blockbusting, and steering are terms that are frequently mixed up. Can you keep them straight? match each of these. Okay. A lending company denies all loans for properties south of the river because of that area's demographics. That would be redlining. Encouraging residents to sell now and avoid declining house values that could accompany minorities would be blockbusting. When working with an African American client, Nancy makes an effort to show them homes in primarily African American communities. That would be steering. All right. Here's another one. Nancy has been a real estate salesperson for a couple of years, and she's still building her business. She has been noticing a demographic shift in the neighborhood where she lives. Many of the longtime residents are elderly white people, and she's overheard them complaining several times about all the African Americans moving into the neighborhood. The democratic shift, plus the chatter around the neighborhood, makes Nancy think that there may be an opportunity to drum up some business. What should she do? She should take a proactive approach and knock on their doors. After a frank conversation about the changing nature of the neighborhood, she should let each owner know that now is a good time to sell. She should hint that prices may drop if they wait. Well, we definitely don't want to do that. Adversely, advertise broadly, but make sure that all of the images of families look Latino. No, we're not going to do that. Make sure that all the listings mention each property's proximity to park, walking trails, and the community center. This would be the least discriminatory option. All right. Nancy's ads talking up the good things about the neighborhood results in a handful of calls. She spoke with Miss. My tongue is getting thicker here. She spoke with Miss Jones, an African American woman who said her family of 5 is looking for a 4-bedroom, 2-bath home with a great yard for their kids. After getting all of her agency paperwork in order, Nancy is going to send over a few area listings from her brokerage that might meet Mrs. Jones's needs. Which listing should she send? Choose all that apply. That applies there's more than one. A newly listed 4-bedroom, 2-bath condo that has African American neighbors. A 5-bedroom, 2-bath townhome with walking trails and a community garden. A 4-bedroom, 2-bath home with a small yard that's near the most prestigious school in the area. A 4-bedroom, 2-bath home that could use a little work but has a large backyard. Nancy thinks it would be better if the yard had a fence though, so it would be safer for the kids. All right. Which of these should she send over? Let's look again. Who said her family of 5 is looking for a 4-bedroom home, 4-bedroom, 2-bath home with a great yard for the kids. Which of these should she send over? Well, the 4-bedroom, 2-bath with a nice backyard, and her opinion about the fence is really just an opinion. A 4-bedroom, 2-bath home with a small yard that's near the most prestigious school. A 5-bedroom, 2-bath house, walking distance, sure. 4-bedroom, 2, I think all of these are appropriate, although the neighbors really doesn't matter. All right, and they're all correct. She should send all qualifying homes to her client. Okay. All right, we've gone through more history. Let's go to uncovering discrimination. All right, this is going to be a great opportunity for me to get something to drink. How long is this video? 2 minutes and 25 seconds. Okay, Discrimination Testing Unit. Fatima Lords, the director of our Discrimination Testing Unit, a fictitious organization used for illustration purposes only, will guide you through a number of issues related to human rights and fair housing. Let me get rid of this. Let me find the, yeah, we can get rid of the transcript. Okay. Here we go. 2 minutes, 25 seconds.
Hello, welcome to DTU, a Fair Housing Discrimination Testing Unit. At DTU, we receive consumer complaints about housing discrimination and investigate them. I'm so happy you were able to come today. The more people who understand what housing discrimination is, the less prevalent it will be.
Nice to meet you. I'm ready to learn.
Great! As a licensee, you touch people in so many ways in their pursuit of housing, through the types of houses you show them, to how you serve them, in both the rental and selling markets.
I never thought about that.
It's true. As a real estate professional, you have a responsibility to know and understand the applicable fair housing and civil rights laws governing your professional services as well as your personal conduct. Your colleagues, clients, and customers expect competent actions based on comprehensive knowledge.
Makes sense.
Wise and experienced professionals strictly follow fair housing procedures. And keep in mind, as we talk about protected classes, that federal definitions of protected classes expand and change, and that both state and local laws may add protected classes.
So there are protected classes at the federal, state, and local levels?
Oh yes, and they're ever broadening as inequalities are uncovered. Your license may depend on something you learn today.
Wow!
That's no exaggeration. Compliance with fair housing laws is mandatory. As you learn about and review protected classes and fair housing laws, you will become better equipped to act with honesty, competence, and intelligence in serving your clients and customers.
I really appreciate you taking the time to educate me on this.
My pleasure. After our tour, I hope you will join the ranks of fair housing advocates.
What do you mean? Are you gonna hit me up for a donation or make me hold a picket sign or something?
Nothing like that. You become a fair housing advocate by being able to recognize and avoid discriminatory behavior and, when it occurs, pointing consumers toward the appropriate agencies where they may receive justice.
That I can manage. I like that.
All right, shedding light on discrimination. Discrimination often happens out of the public eye, which is one reason it continues to occur. Take a few moments to watch the video in your resources, then determine which of these statements describes a standard process currently used to discover discrimination. Let's see, exposing. Let me just extend these so they don't. Okay. There's another video for us to watch. Just going to extend all these so they don't expire. All right, let's watch this video. 5 minutes.
Discrimination in housing contributes to the persistence of broader inequalities in housing, in homeownership, in neighborhoods, access to education, wealth building. So where we live really matters. In order to know just how big a problem housing discrimination is, the Department of Housing and Urban Development uses a measurement method that's called paired testing. In each test, two people, one white and one minority, call and then visit an apartment complex or a real estate agent's office and inquire about a house or apartment that was just advertised recently. And they make the same requests, and they describe themselves as having the same income, the same assets, and the same employment. So from the perspective of the landlord or the real estate agent, they really are completely comparable customers. The only difference between them is their race or ethnicity. And if over hundreds of tests, we see that the whites are shown more units, told about more units, that's solid evidence of discrimination. And if our work can rigorously and responsibly measure how often that's happening, we can contribute to progress towards eliminating that unfairness. So our new study results find that both the white customer and the minority customer are treated politely. They get to come and have an appointment, and they find out about some units. But when you compare their treatment, you discover the whites saw more units or was told about more units. So what's troubling about this kind of discrimination is how hard it is to detect. I had a chance to meet with Justin Carter, who's worked both as a tester and a test coordinator on our housing discrimination studies. And he told me about his personal experiences conducting tests and managing the testing process. So Justin, I've done a huge amount of research testing in my life, but I've never really been a tester. So I have no idea what it's like to walk in the door and actually do the testing myself.
Well, being a tester it's somewhat different than the work that you do, being a researcher, but the mentality that I would always take working personally as a tester was, I'm trying to gather data. I'm trying to remain objective and pull as much data from this test as I can. And I've been involved on tests where an agent, has said very objectionable things and said them again and again and again, and it just sort of just keeps happening, and you're just sitting there, and you just have to you don't want to encourage it, you don't want to discourage it, but you just sort of have to take it.
We walked a little bit in this neighborhood. It's a pretty nice homeowner, I think, mostly neighborhood. Did you test in neighborhoods like this, or was it?
Absolutely. We tested in all neighborhoods, all different income levels.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the type of neighborhood that we would do a lot of testing in. So neighborhoods like this, we tested these neighborhoods all the time.
In horrible weather?
Oh yeah, of course.
I've been working on these studies since the 1989 study, when I was a research associate here at the Urban Institute. It's been really rewarding to keep coming back to this issue every decade. Those most serious and severe door slamming kinds of discrimination aren't happening so frequently. But it's disappointing too to conduct a study of housing discrimination in 2012 and find that it still persists.
All right, we can see that video is about a dozen years old. Shedding light on discrimination. Discrimination often happens out of the public eye, which is one reason it continues to occur. Take a few moments to watch the video, then determine which of these statements describes the standard process currently used to discover discriminatory practices. Human rights advocates interview specific protected classes to make sure they haven't experienced recent discrimination. Human rights advocates call lenders and landlords to ask about their discriminatory policies. Or human rights advocates test real estate and mortgage professionals using pairs of testers that match in everything except their protected classes. Let's go with that one. Good job. All right. All right. Well, we've got a 46-second video. Let's watch this one.
Hello, come in. Is that your application? Okay, let me take a look. Let's see. It says here that you're both professionals, work full-time, combined salary of $125,000, great credit scores. Provided your references check out, I see no reason why we can't offer you our first available unit. It should be ready at the first of the month.
Excellent.
When will we know for sure if we got the apartment?
I should have an answer for you in 2 or 3 days. Nice couple.
All right, I believe this is going to be a comparative video.
Hello, come in. Is that your application? Okay, let me take a look. Let's see. It says here that you're both professionals, work full-time, combined salary of $125,000, great credit scores. But it's too bad. You're not quite what we're looking for. Wish I could be of more help, but your combined salary just doesn't match our income requirements. And of course, with the baby coming, I doubt you'll be going back to work, will you?
Now wait just a minute.
That's really none of your business.
I'm sorry you wasted your time. Best of luck to you. Too bad. Seemed like a nice couple.
All right, design the testing. The DTU heard that the landlord in the example scenario is discriminating against all of the federally protected classes. It already tested for familiar status. How would it test for other federally protected classes? Consider which ones would represent a protected class and which characteristics landlords are allowed to consider when making rental decisions. Everything stays the same except one couple speaks with Russian accents. Not a test. Everything stays the same except one couple wears clothing typical of people who practice Islam. Not a test. Everything stays the same except the man has a criminal record. Possible test. Oh, criminal history is a legal way to screen potential tenants and is not discriminate. Oh wait, I'm not doing this right, am I? Let me try it again. Let me read this again. How would it test for other federally? Okay, I see. So it's the opposite. Everything stays the same except one couple speaks with, okay, possible test. Everything stays the same except one wears typical clothes of Islam, possible test. Except the man has a criminal record. Let's see. There we go. I just was reversing how I should answer it. All right. Let's go to the next one. All right. We just did lesson 4 under uncovering discrimination. Let's do lesson 5. Protected classes in Michigan. Now, this is specific to the state that I'm studying. So if you're in Michigan, this might be helpful, and this might be helpful to whatever state you might be in as well. But please keep in mind all states are slightly different. So your state, this may or may not apply to your state. In addition to 7 federally protected classes, race, color, religion, disability, sex, familial status, and national origin, Michigan fair housing laws add the protected classes of marital status and age. Keep in mind that local jurisdictions may add even more protected classes, and there may be additional protected classes that apply only to certain types of discrimination. For instance, age is a protected class at the federal level for employment. It is illegal to discriminate against someone for employment based on their age. But it is not a protected class at the federal level for housing. Don't worry, we've sorted all of this out for you and included a list of protected classes that apply specifically to housing discrimination in your resource. But be sure to know your local fair housing laws as well. Okay. Marcia Coffey, broker for North Star Realty Development, is meeting over lunch with one of her more recent licensees, Jerry, to discuss Michigan fair housing law. As they sit down, Jerry said, I hear they have a killer Cubano pork sandwich here. Ooh, that sounds good, Marcia said. She wrinkled her nose in mock dismay before smiling. But I'm trying to eat healthy, so I don't outgrow my mother of the bride dress. Jerry laughed. That's right. When is your daughter getting married? Marcia groaned and then said, 2 weeks. You'd think the world revolved around this wedding. My goodness. But back to business. Let's continue our discussion about fair housing laws. Do you remember what we discussed about protected classes? Jerry smiled. Yes, and I've been reading up on fair housing laws in Michigan. Marcia grinned at him. Glad to hear it. How about a pop quiz then? She lifted one eyebrow in a challenge. Jerry laughed. Really? Okay, shoot. All right, let's find our resource protected classes in Michigan. We can get rid of our video transcripts. We've done that one. We get rid of that. Get rid of that. We watched that video. Familiar status as a protected class. Protected classes in Michigan. Okay. Federally protected. Race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, physical or mental disability. Protected in Michigan: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, physical or race, mental disability, marital status, sexual orientation. Local ordinance may protect these cases, but be certain to check local ordinances before drafting a fair housing policy. Best practice: treat all clients and customers fairly without regard to their protected class status. All right. Gender identity, age, ancestry, creed, family responsibility, lawful income, occupation, personal appearance, political opinion, presence of children, source of income. All right, those are all the additional protected classes in Michigan. So basically everybody. I think that's pretty easy. How many total protected classes does Michigan recognize at the state and federal level? Marcia asked. I believe it's 9. Let's check. Yes. So 7 federal plus 2 state is 9. Michigan protected classes. Jerry thought for a minute. Let's see. 9, right? There are 7 federal and 2 for Michigan. Marcia nodded with approval. Yep, nice work. So you know that it's illegal to engage in discriminatory housing practices against those who belong to one of those protected classes, right? Yes, definitely, Jerry said. Good. I'll quiz you again when you least expect it, Marcia smiled. Here is a list of protected classes I put together for you. Great, thank you. Marcia opened her menu. You bet. Now let's eat. Shall we? I'm starved. Jerry grinned, opening his own menu. Me too. All right. Still off of our resource. Throughout the state of Michigan, additional classes are protected from housing discrimination. Do you know which ones? Marital status, protected. Military status. I would assume that's protected. Let's go back. Huh. I don't ever remember seeing military status on any of this. We're going to say not protected. I might be wrong. Student status? I didn't see student either. Hmm. Age is protected. All right. Yeah, we're right. So I guess student and military status isn't a protected class. All right, protection for families. What do families with children and individuals with disabilities have in common? Until 1989, it was legal to discriminate against these, now protected classes. Title VIII was amended in 1988 by the Fair Housing Amendment Act, which added individuals with disabilities and families with children as federally protected classes. Until then, landlords could refuse to rent to a pregnant woman, restrict families with children to downstairs units in an apartment building, or even evict a female renter who became pregnant. Your resource will cover what is meant by familial status, the term given to this relatively recent protected class, and what constitutes illegal discrimination. Familiar status as a protected class. All right. In a 1988 amendment to Title VIII of the 1968 Civil Rights Amendment, added families with children as a federally protected class and made it illegal to discriminate based on familial status in sale, rental, or financing of dwellings and in other housing-related transactions. Familial status includes families with children under 18 living with parents or legal custodians, pregnant women, people securing custody of children under 18. Examples of illegal discrimination include housing advertisements stating that children aren't wanted, charging families higher rent or related fees because they have a child, restricting families with children to one area of a building or complex, denying housing to families or evicting people because they have a child, administering rules and procedures that unfairly target families with children, denying a mortgage because a person is pregnant or takes maternity leave, charging a higher interest rate because a person is pregnant or takes maternity leave. All right. Identify which of these practices are violations of fair housing protection laws for protected classes and which are not. All right, violation or not violation. Increasing the security deposit for a family with 7 children. That is a violation. Renting out a unit in a multifamily housing property that was built in 1970 that doesn't meet current ADA standards. That is not a violation. Charging higher monthly rent to a divorced single woman who is also pregnant. That would be a violation. Advertising housing specifically to couples with no children. That would be a violation. All right, we're good. Let's see what our next section is. Last section, fair housing and rentals. In the real world, discrimination can often be quite subtle, or there can be factors that muddy the waters. See what you think of the situation described in this resource. Based on your knowledge of fair housing law, would you identify a violation in the situation that the letter writers described to Randy? Okay, we need to go ahead and look at our resource. Tenant versus landlord. Randall is a licensed broker with many years of experience in property management. He also acts as Randy to the rescue, an advice columnist in the local newspaper. People with housing problems write in with their questions, and he provides appropriate guidance regarding real estate regulations, fair housing, and so forth. One day, he received 2 letters that he strongly suspected were about a single situation, but from opposing points of view. Here's the first letter he received. Dear Randy, I am an immigrant from Colombia. I have lived in the same apartment for 4 years now, but recently there is a new manager and she has been harassing me. For one thing, she informed me that there would be an increase in my rent. Normally the rent increases about 1 time a year, but this is the second increase this year. I asked a neighbor if he got the same notice and he said no. Then, last week, I asked the manager to fix a problem with my kitchen sink, which was not draining. I should explain that I speak English still with an accent, and I am better at writing English than I am at speaking it. When I asked the manager to fix my sink, she got mad at me and said she couldn't understand me. I tried to explain the problem, but then she told me that I should learn to speak English if I'm going to stay in this country. I'm afraid to make a problem because my visa has expired. But I have been a good tenant for a long time, and I don't understand why the new manager is acting this way. What should I do? Sincerely afraid. The second letter Randy received that seemed to be about the same situation was this one. Dear Randy, I'm a property manager for an apartment building. My question is about a tenant that I have who is foreign and doesn't speak English. Recently, she came to me and demanded some modifications to her kitchen. I'm not sure exactly what she wanted because she doesn't speak English in spite of living here for several years. I suspect that she is illegal. It frightens me to have someone here that I can't communicate with. I'm also afraid that I am breaking the law by allowing her to stay if she is legal. Do you think I should evict her? All right. Is there a violation? Based on your knowledge of fair housing law, would you identify a violation in the situation that the letter writers described to Randy? No, because there is not a protected class involved. Yes, there appears to be discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. No, because the tenant is not covered under fair housing law. So we're going to say yes. I think that's pretty much a given there. Can the tenant file a complaint with HUD? I believe they could. Fair housing and rentals summary. Although this scenario was designed for you to exercise your fair housing chops, it's based on an actual situation experienced by a tenant. You can read about it at the website linked in your resources. We're not going to read about that, but it is in the resources if you want to. I think this is, no, did I not have it in here? Okay. All right. So finally, we're going to take the unit exam. That's 14 questions. I have taken it, but this is study time. We won't see how we did until the end of the exam. I'm going to go ahead and close out all these other All right. What's the term for a lender refusing to lend in a specific area, often based on the area's minority makeup? I believe that's redlining. In 1934, when the Federal Housing Administration was created, it adopted the practice of crossing off cities and, oh, wait a minute, gerrymandering. That's gerrymandering. Term of a lender refusing to lend in a specific area, often based. Ooh, I'm pretty sure that's gerrymandering. We're going to leave it at that. In 1934, when the Federal Housing Administration was created, it adopted the practice of crossing off cities and neighborhoods it considered risky and refused to insure loans for purchases in those areas. What is this action called? That would be redlining. How does discrimination testing work? Two different applicants whose only difference is protected class apply for the same property. We know that. Which of these situations does the American with Disabilities Act address? Marcus, a property manager, routinely dismisses rental applications from families with children under the age of 18. Meridian Apartments provides a gym and pool area for residents, but it's not accessible to residents who use wheelchairs. Metro agents hired an interpreter to assist Spanish-speaking clients with the real estate process. The Golden Gate Senior Housing Center has no exercise or activity center for its residents. We're going to say Meridian Apartments provides a gym and pool area for residents, but is not accessible to residents who use wheelchairs. Which U.S. Supreme Court decision consolidated 5 cases involving the constitutionality of state-sponsored segregation in public schools? So here's where we got to know the specific. Which U.S. Supreme Court decision consolidated 5 cases involving the constitutionality of state-sponsored segregation? We know that should be Brown v. Board of Education. Which of these might bring a charge of illegal steering against the licensee? Benny screens the properties he shows his clients based on the client's preferences. Johnny is working with a client who has a disability. At the client's request, Johnny refrains from showing the client listings that aren't ADA accessible. Norton encourages his clients to contact local agencies to learn more about a neighborhood's school, crime rates, and religious institutions. Working with single-family female clients, Cassandra is careful to promote properties and neighborhoods she considers safe. This would be a steering. It's very subtle, but it is steering because it is not the real estate agent's responsibility to determine what neighborhood a client wants to live in. That's the client's responsibility. If a tenant who is an illegal immigrant files a complaint with HUD, how will HUD respond to the complaint? HUD does not ask for investigate immigration status and will respond to the complaint by investigating the alleged discrimination. HUD will deny the complaint based on the complainant's immigration status. No. HUD will investigate the complaint but charges immigrants a fee. No. HUD will refer the complainant to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. No. So we're going to go with 1A there. Okay. Your client submits an application to rent a condo unit. He has excellent credit and has had the same job for a long time. He uses a cane to help with his mobility. When his application is rejected, he feels it's due to his disability. He is protected under what federal law? Civil Rights Act of 1866, Fair Housing Amendments of 1988, Fair Housing Act of 1968, or Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. See, this is where it gets tricky. Oh, let's see. When did we add disability? I'm going to say we added disability in 1968. I could be wrong on that one, but we'll find out. These are just like little sample tests. So, Title 8 of which law prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing? I'm going to say 1968 again. Let's see. Which act provides consumers with remedies if they become victims of discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing of housing? Let's do the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988. Which agency enforces Title II under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 when it relates to state and local public housing, housing assistance, and housing referrals? Department of Civil Rights, Department of Equal Opportunity, Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're going to go with, oh, is it Housing of Urban Development or Civil Rights Department? Which one do you think, Paul? Which agency enforces Title II under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 when it relates to state and local public housing, housing assistance, and housing referrals? Is it Department of Civil Rights, Department of Equal Opportunity, Department of Housing and Community Development, or Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD? I feel like it's Civil Rights or HUD, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think it's HUD.
I think it's HUD.
Yeah, because I've never heard of Department of Equal Opportunity.
Do we have a Department of Civil Rights? I don't
I
think
don't know. I don't heard of
that
that
doesn't
either.
sound right either,
Yeah,
does it?
HUD sounds right to me.
We'll go with HUD. Which agency is charged with enforcing fair housing laws and holding all parties accountable for compliance with these laws and regulations? Oof. See, this is which agency is charged with enforcing fair housing laws and holding all parties accountable for compliance with these laws and regulations? Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, Equal Credit. I'm going to go with Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. Could be. Oh, Office of Housing and Community Development. Oof. See, this is where these are tricky. Let me see if I made a note on my flashcards. Yep, housing. We're gonna go with this fourth one, Office of Housing and Community Development. Individuals who experience housing discrimination are protected or provided the opportunity to file a complaint based on the provisions of which act? Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Civil Rights Act of 1866, Fair Housing Act of 1968, or the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988. Experience housing discrimination provided. It's either 68 or 88. I'm going to say 88. No, I'm going to say 68. To file a complaint based on the provisions of which act? Ooh. Oh, let's go with 68. I think I'm going to be wrong on that one too, but it's okay. Well, that's why we do this. As a stipulation of a specific act, lenders must offer reasons when rejecting loan applications and must respond to all applications within 30 days. What's the name of this act? Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 74, Fair Housing Amendments of 88, or Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. I'm going to go with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974. All right, let's see how we did. We got 3 wrong. Oof. Okay, that was redlining. Okay, that was my initial. Sometimes I get a little mixed up because they'll ask you 2 questions in a row that are the same, but they're both redlining. What's the term for a lender refusing to lend in a specific area, often based on the area's minority? That is redlining. Okay, so we'll remember that, or try to. Let's see what else we got wrong here. See, this is where you could just read it all. Okay. Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. All right. which federal law protects people from being discriminated based on, and it's the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988. Okay, so disability was 1988, 1960, not 1968. All right. And which agency is charged with enforcing fair housing laws and holding all parties accountable for compliance with these laws and regulations? I said HUD, Housing and Community Development, and it's the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. All right, well, see, this is why we do these things. So now we're going to go to Unit 2, Compliance with Federal Fair Housing Laws. So let's reset ourselves here for the next unit. We've done Unit 1 of, we'll go back to the course home here, Section 7, Unit 1. I think there's 3 under Section 7, 4. So now we're going on to Unit 2, Compliance with Federal Fair Housing Laws. So we've got 4 sections of this. You can see our resources here. So let's open up our resources. Let's get these opened. I just open them in a new tab. That way they're all open and ready. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is an external link. Okay, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 2 more. All right. All right. So this should get us set up for the next unit. I am going to take a break for about an hour, make myself some breakfast, take a little stretch. As you can see, we've been streaming now for an hour and a half. So that took us an hour and a half to get through 1 unit of a 4-unit section. So as you can tell, this is going to take us a while. That's okay. This is a review. Again, I am just a student. I am not a licensee yet. What you are doing with me is going through my study session with me. I'm reviewing or going back through the entire course that I took. Because I took this course over many months, a lot of this information became a little dry for me, a little forgetful. So I'm just doing this again before I take the state exam. I have passed this course, but this is just study time. So I'm going to put up a little reminder here. I'm going to give myself about an hour to study, or to not study, but and so it's 10:45. So we're going to go. This is just for anybody who joins us. Oh, 11:45, not 10:45. Give myself an hour, not 5 minutes here. Okay. There we go. Let's do that. I need a timer. Where'd my timer go? Let's get that timer back up. There we go. There we go. Well, that's a little big. How do we? that. There we go. Do that, I think. That's good enough. Get rid of all this other junk. We don't need to do advertising for anybody. All right. I will be back in less than an hour. Maybe less than what's on the screen.